Uh, Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us on the Ukraine Investment Conference. 2 years ago, we saw Maidan, Revolution of Dignity. At that time, we started our company, Empire State Capital Partners, with our partners here, who will be speaking today as well. A year ago, we had our first Ukraine conference. Today, we're celebrating our 2-year anniversary, and we thank you for supporting what we do. We are for New Ukraine. We are for transparency and for bringing fresh capital to help build out the center and heart of Europe for future generations to come. I would like to give the word to a very distinguished gentleman, Bohdan Hawrylyshyn, a renowned economist, founder of Davos, and member of Home Club. Please, Bohdan, we strive to attain what the values that you bring as well.
That was starting with a strong signal. Well, actually, I'm ashamed that I have a doctorate in economics. I do not consider myself an economist, at least not the way in which the economists are now, because the economists have committed crime against humanity by reducing to a single indicator progress of societies, that is GDP per capita, growth, and general level of GDP as an indicator of well-being. There's absolutely no correlation between the growth of GDP or the high level of GDP and the feeling of well-being of the population. So I have to kind of deny that I'm an economist. I know the world. I've been in 89 countries. I've changed the destiny of some. So I would say maybe I'm a man more in geopolitics than economics. But now to our topic. Ukraine is in a very bad condition, politically, economically, socially, ecologically. It is much worse than it was in 1990, after the elections in March of 90, which were very democratic, and up to, say, declaration of sovereignty on the 16th of July of that year, and then it was also things that had happened in 91. Ukraine was already de facto an independent country, though formally not yet. So why is the state of Ukraine, the condition of Ukraine, so very poor? It is because of poor governance. And why is there poor governance in our country? Because people that should be in the governance system, particularly those at the top, should have 3 qualities. They should be patriotic, they should be competent, and they should be correct rather than corrupt. Now, patriotic, so the only priority they would have is the well-being of the society, of the country, of the state. They should be competent, they should know what they are to do, and be able to do it effectively. And thirdly, as I say, they should be correct in the sense than corrupt, as so many happen to be. Now, given this kind of condition of the country, is it appropriate to have a conference on investment? I think it is. In fact, it's an excellent timing to have this kind of conference, and I'll try to enumerate some of the reasons why. Well, the very first reason why, I would say that there is this deregulation program that is being implemented now for nearly 2 years. By reducing the regulations to the minimum, we are automatically uprooting the sources of corruption, of petty corruption. So we don't have to have, if you like, great agencies to fight corruption. We actually can eliminate at least the petty corruption that way. Now, the second, it's a more perhaps important indicator why we should have a conference on investment, is that we have shifted to transactions, to electronic transactions for the government purchases. I will not dwell into the fact that this was by far the biggest, the big-scale corruption that we had in Ukraine. This scheme has been dreamt up by rather young people. It has been agreed with the World Trade Organization in Geneva. It has been implemented already in Ukraine, but also gradually countries from around the world are joining it. They can bid to supply services or goods, but there is no cash that will be exchanging hands in the process. So this is another, I think, important reason why kind of conditions for investments are improving. The third, I think, very important reason is that we have a new Prime Minister. And the new Prime Minister, Mr. Groisman, I believe has these three characteristics that I have evoked before: patriotic, competent, and correct. I think he has proven that he had these qualities or these characteristics in Vinnytsia. To me, at least, it's sufficient proof of that fact. Now, of course, there are, I would say, could have mentioned before, there are deputies, there are people in the cabinet of ministers, there are people in the presidential administration. There are patriotic, competent, and correct. However, they're not a critical mass in any of the organs of the state. And therefore, they do not really have enough influence on what laws are passed and what is actually implemented and how by the executive branch of government. So now, yet another reason that I could mention is, maybe I'll, there is, perhaps it will be questioned a little bit, but I think that we have a good Attorney General that has been just appointed recently, Dozenko. Now, I know that the nomination procedure, or the decision on that, has not been done in a very orthodox fashion. But I think the man is also, in my view, and I have known him for decades, that he has these three characteristics. Secondly, he has a very strong will. Thirdly, he certainly suffered himself from bad attorney generals, from corrupt attorney generals, and certainly from our judicial system, which has to be dramatically overhauled. That's one of the points that I'll mention again. Now, the judicial system actually changes, and dramatic changes in it are required, and I think it is on the way. It's coming. We can feel that it's about to start there. Now, also, and very important, that actually USA, Mr. Ambassador, has reacted to these changes that I've just enumerated before very positively, and so did the International Monetary Fund. I think this actually strengthens Ukraine's position, and it's extremely important. I need not add, but perhaps should, because we have representatives from the Japanese embassy, that Japan is again forthcoming with a very significant sum to help Ukraine manage itself better. Now, I would say, however, that with all these sort of positive factors, some changes, we still have to admit that Ukraine cannot just do with slow, Sometimes it's a snail pace type of reforms. A great deal of talk about it, but very slow implementation of reforms. So Ukraine will in fact have to be dramatically transformed rather than just simply reformed, because it'll take too long. Results will not be sufficient. And that will be done too. There is actually a program called Young Generation Will Change Ukraine. There are, aside from participants on this program, there are over 2,000 graduates of better Western universities that actually decided to return to Ukraine over 2 years ago. And the return to Ukraine simply to do something for Ukraine. All of them, I stress, could have had very nice jobs. They could have had very comfortable salaries. They returned with a single motive. We want to do something for our country. So a transformation will take place because we need to change entirely the political structure. We have to change the economic system. We have to change our social and ecological policies. So with the participants of this program, with these over 2,000 students, with the people that are now scattered in the system that are actually patriotic, competent, correct, but are not a critical mass to be able to influence how the country really functions, I think it will be possible to make these changes, and we call it transformation without a revolution. So I think that given the fact that we already have significant changes and improvements, that the economy is going to grow this year. There will be quite a dramatic change. We have been falling and we are beginning to move up. And if I add yet another fact, the assets are very cheap in Ukraine. So I think this is really the time to get in and actually start investing in the expectation that further few changes are on the way and that actually there will be a sufficiently good law to protect the property, and there will be a sufficiently correct judicial system to assure that particular right. So with that, I would just like to wish you, maybe I should add another thing. I'm not yet sure that we can call the country already New Ukraine, but we are moving toward New Ukraine. So I wish you a very, very productive conference on the investments. And I think the country will benefit from your decisions that you'll be making today. Thank you.
Do you want to start? The ambassador, I guess.
Okay, so do it from the chair, probably easier.
Yes.
We will begin our first panel. I would like to ask the Ambassador Pyatt of the United States of America to start the discussion. Is Mr. Pyatt?
Thank you. I'm going to speak from the chair. I think it'll give way to a more conversational discussion. First of all, let me say thank you very much to Empire Capital for having me here today. It's a special pleasure for me to be sitting where I am between two hugely talented friends and colleagues. Dmytro Shymkiv has been one of the greatest champions of reform in the Ukrainian government since President Poroshenko's arrival in office. And it is the presence, the continued presence and voice of people like him in circles of decision-making here that make me optimistic about Ukraine's long-term prospects. And then Steve from Citibank has been a pillar of the American business community, but he has another claim to fame, which I will note this morning in particular, which is that it's Steve who gave me the opportunity first to meet Jamala. And I know that for especially all of my Ukrainian colleagues here today, anything that I say is irrelevant against the background of Jamala's terrific, inspiring victory in Stockholm on Saturday in the Eurovision competition. So thanks, Steve, for that. In any case, just to set the tone with a couple of opening remarks, and then I hope we can have a dialogue. I will say to begin, I am feeling more optimistic about Ukraine, about the prospects for Ukraine and reform than I have felt in about 12 months right now. I think we are in a very hopeful moment. A lot of the reasons were detailed by Bohdan in his opening remarks, so I won't repeat those. But the most important single indicator, I think, and the most important single cause for optimism is the clear signal that has come from Prime Minister Groisman and his new government of the commitment to sticking to the path of reform, the commitment to capitalizing on the very tough measures that Prime Minister Yatsenyuk and his government implemented in terms of the implementation of the IMF package, in terms of transformation of the energy sector, in terms of revision to things like the government procurement process and ProZorro that Bohdan talked about, the cleaning up of the financial sector, which doesn't get enough attention, the fact that Governor Huntereva and the very professional team at the central bank has managed to close more than a third of Ukrainian banks without the financial system wobbling as a result of it. So there is cause for great optimism. This should be a very wealthy country. Ukraine has enormous, enormous untapped potential. It has some of the best agricultural land in the world. It has very strong human capital. It has strong traditions in areas like metallurgy and avionics. It has an emergent high-tech technology industry, which Dmytro knows well, and critically important, it has both the technical capacity, the science, engineering, technology training base, but also the democratic culture that allows for the flourishing of a knowledge-based industry, something Dmytro and I were talking about. I was at my daughter's graduation this weekend, and Larry Ellison was one of the speakers there. And every time you hear people from Silicon Valley talking about how they came to their success, you realize that Ukraine has all the same ingredients, and it's just a matter of tackling the issues that Bohdan alluded to, which are the questions of governance. Number one priority right now, of course, is the implementation of the IMF program. There are important steps that now need to be approved by the Rada, and I would flag, I think, as the most important single risk factor for Ukraine over the next couple of weeks, the attitude of the Rada and the ability of the President, the Prime Minister, former Prime Minister Yatsenyuk, to continue to maintain discipline inside the Rada, to get the Rada to take the difficult steps that are part of capitalizing on the progress that has been made over the past 18 months in order to sustain the green shoots of economic recovery, which are already visible in the Ukrainian macroeconomy. Bohdan alluded to the issue of corruption, which is probably the single greatest impediment to unlocking greater foreign investment in Ukraine, which over the long term is going to be the driver of rapid growth, getting investors like yourselves to come back into Ukraine. We are encouraged by the appointment of a new prosecutor general, and I was very encouraged to hear Bohdan's positive assessment of Yuri Lutsenko, which meets my own. Lutsenko is a patriot. He's somebody who's clearly interested in building a European Ukraine. But unfortunately, he inherits an institution which is corrupted from top to bottom. And this is not just a matter of changing one institution. As I said famously last October in Odessa, it's about the office of the prosecutor general, the whole system, which is in need of root and branch reform, as Ukraine has accomplished successfully, for instance, with its new patrol police, which is an example of how it's possible to change institutions in this country in a way that generates enormous goodwill among the Ukrainian people. because Ukrainians want to see these institutions move ahead. And I think that's one of the other things, for those of you who are operating in a global environment, one of the key positive factors about Ukraine today is that this is not a country that is suffering from from reform fatigue. In fact, when you look at the public opinion data, what it makes clear is that most Ukrainians want to see reform move faster. They aren't complaining about the pace of reform. They're complaining that reform hasn't come fast enough. And that's what's going to continue, I think, to incentivize those like Dmytro and the others who have dedicated their professional lives now to building this new country to continue to move the system forward. Couple of quick remarks, and then I will hand it over and look forward to the conversation. Especially for Ukrainian business, I think it's very important that Ukrainian business continues to maintain an active voice in favor of reform, making clear what are the requirements that you see as priorities going forward. I'm absolutely convinced that 2016 is going to be the year which will determine whether or not Ukraine moves successfully on an irreversible path towards becoming part of the European family of nations in the fullest institutional sense. This is the year in which the gains of the revolution of dignity can be locked in and the process of reform can be made irreversible. That clearly is the goal of Prime Minister Groisman. I know that from my conversations with him. That's the goal that former Prime Minister Yatsenyuk has committed to support. And I think one very positive factor for Ukraine right now is the fact that former Prime Minister Yatsenyuk has made clear his commitment to supporting Groisman's success. That will help going forward through what is necessarily going to be a difficult process of reform. Bohdan mentioned a couple of the other key leading indicators. Privatization is obviously one. Privatization is important, both in order to improve the investment climate, but also to eliminate the use of these state assets as sources of illicit profits for key oligarchic and political groups inside the Ukrainian political system. So how this privatization process goes forward is a key indicator to watch. We will be particularly focused on the upcoming privatization of the Odessa portside plant, the largest fertilizer plant in Europe, and that will help, I think, set either a positive or a negative tone for the larger process of privatization that lies ahead. I'm very encouraged by my conversations last week with the new Minister of Infrastructure. Minister Hawrylyshyn is clearly focused on consolidating the move towards corporate governance in these large state enterprises. There have been successful new international competitions to attract new bosses for the Ukrainian railways, for Ukrainian Post. Not surprisingly, the sectors that have been more resistant to that kind of corporate-based change are those which are attached to energy, which is the sector which has been the traditional Bermuda Triangle of corruption in Ukrainian politics. It's been used by Russia to distort politics in this country. It's been used by oligarchic groups to hold on to their levers of power, and it has been a huge disincentive to the kind of growth that Ukraine should be able to achieve over the long term. But it's exactly that kind of oligarchic system that I know Minister Hawrylyshyn, Prime Minister Groisman are committed now to breaking up. So we'll be keeping a close eye on how that process of corporate reform of state-owned enterprises goes forward. And then finally, to finish where I began, it's all about the IMF. The United States is committed, and Prime Minister Groisman and President Poroshenko spoke last week to Vice President Biden, who reaffirmed the United States commitment now to move ahead with a third billion-dollar loan guarantee. We hope that that will happen, the signing of that will happen relatively soon. And in fact, Vice President Biden has invited Prime Minister Groisman to visit Washington next month in order to carry this process forward. But the key is going to be the completion of negotiations between Ukraine and the IMF on the disbursement of the next tranche of IMF assistance, and then the RADA's commitment to continue making the tough votes that are going to be necessary to consolidate success and to lay the foundation for what should be a long-term growth trajectory in this country. So let me stop there, and again, I look forward to the conversation.
Thank
And likewise, to add to Ambassador Pyatt's comment about how important technology and IT is going to be for Ukraine, we have in the room today distinguished guests from Israel that were founders of the Silicon Valley there, Visa Ventures has come. So we also believe that technology will be one of the leading aspects. So I asked Dmytro if you would also say a few words with your knowledge about that sector as well in Ukraine.
Thank you. Ambassador, guests, it's an honor to be here. And thank you very much for very friendly comments. It's always a pleasure to be here on the stage with Bohdan, with Ambassador Steve. It's been a challenging years for Ukraine, but I will talk about, within my few first remarks, about glass half full. And when you look at this glass half full for Ukraine, because majority of the people sitting on the stage is optimist. I think all of the people here sitting optimist, and I hope majority of people who come and looking into investments in Ukraine are optimists. So let's look at the glass half full. If we look at those half, which is full, it's what been done in Ukraine during the last year. Macro-financial stabilization. It's about significant changes in the financial system. Just think, over the last 1.5 years, we removed 73 banks out of the financial system. 73 banks. Nobody in the world done this, ever. Taking out the corrupt, non-structured, non-performing banks out of the system, which means it's a healthy financial system for Ukraine. Second, anti-corruption. And I know it's a big topic for a lot of discussion, etc. The new Anti-Corruption Bureau was able to start only in September last year. And already now it has 119 cases. It has 9 cases in the courts, and it's keep going. The whole institution needs to be established. It needs to be financed. It needs to be functioning. It needs to have people. It needs to train people. Recruiting people for this institution is a difficult job. And it's functioning. When we look into the history of other countries which have been establishing anti-corruption institution, the average start time, 3 years. We did it in 1. Police. Today, it's 22 cities. Just over the last quarter, we added 12. So the pace of the development with the establishment of the law enforcement changes is taking higher pace. Over the last quarter, we doubled the police force, the new police force, versus the full last year. Procurement. Let me give you some numbers. The public procurement reform with electronic system Prozoro, which started with the civil society, continued through the first ministries, then roll out as a big reform to all ministry and all institutions. At the end of 2015, the target amount that was traded in the system was 8.5 billion hryvnias. Today, after first quarter, it's 15.7. Again, double. The same with the savings, the same with the old numbers in the system. So the procurement, electronic procurement, going full speed and doubling its performance. Decentralization. It's giving more empowerment to the regions. This has been another big area of opportunities for investors because the regions are more empowered and the regions are more decisive what kind of investments go into each area, where they need investments, what kind of investment support they will have. Today, we have 159 communities by the end of 2015. Over the last quarter, we add an additional 10. And the pace of getting financial support to this institution is also doubling. Again, another number. Local government general fund budget in March January-March 2015 was 5.5 billion. January-March 2016 is 15 billion. It's 3 times more. More money to the regional governments, more empowerment to the regional authorities, more interest and more projects and more opportunities for investment. Financial sector, but looking at the budgeting more. We reduced tax for payroll tax twice to 22%. Also taxes on the exploration of the gas and other resources been also reduced. Deregulation. This number very not often been said, but we abolished 16,000 Soviet Union regulatory acts by Ministry of Economy. We introduced with the state-owned enterprises reform, the process of auditing state-owned enterprises, the publishing annual reports. There was a new one just published, which is continuing the third of 3 previous ones, about top 100 state-owned enterprises, where they are, how they are performing, and what's their results. What it means transparency. It means transparency in transacting and looking at opportunities for partnership, as well as possibility for privatization in the future. Because it gives a track record what these companies are doing and how they are doing. It's a possibility to assess the performance of their managers, of their CEOs, understanding what the changes and what opportunities lies in front of us. Education reform. This is an area where we're kicking off many, many changes. It's about adhering to European standards. Ukraine joined Horizon 2020, which is creating an opportunity for Ukrainian research and development to actually benefit from 80 billion euros, which are available for projects driven with investments in R&D. Healthcare. The one area which is probably will have more elements in the, not in the half full, but half empty. At the same time, the procurement through international organizations enabled us to show off saving between 30 to 50% consolidated. And it's about the procurement for vaccination, it's procurement for tuberculosis, it's the procurement for cancer treatment. At the same time, military reform, we increased the military, we still have aggression from Russia in East, we have occupation of Crimea. This is all has a significant hit on the economy. But Ukraine increased the spending on the military to 5% of GDP, on the whole security sector, 5% of GDP, and continuing to invest in this area. Energy independence, 63% last year of gas was coming from European Union. Just 2 years ago, 92 were coming from Russia. It's a big change. The change of the increase of the tariffs, creating unequal conditions for within the market, removing the areas where oligarchy can benefit. Digital reforms, 3G tenders, procurement Prozoro, petitions to the president. Actually, you can go and look at the Ministry of Finance, the initiative that was driven by Natalie Yaresko, that every transaction that the Treasury does is online. And you can look and see who is spending money, government money, for what. The list is pretty big. So now this is the half full. So there is still water in this half full thing. So it's not that critical that nothing is done. It's done. And if you compare it with other countries who have been doing reforms, actually the change and the things that's been done within this just 2 years, it's amazing. But let's look at another half, which is empty. And this is about political unity in terms of driving reforms further. It's about IMF support, and it's not about the fact that we need to perform in order to satisfy IMF. It's about us doing things which is important for the state so that we receive a necessary credit money that's enabled to run the reforms. That's the whole purpose of international funding. When we look, it's about very big and long agenda for European integration. We have association agenda where every line in this document identifies reform. And it's a big document. And each line is a project. A project starting from the border control across all Ukraine, up to the transformation of the cultural system, tourism, and so on. This is all opportunities for investments. Where we need to do further, and this is probably the big talks for the investors, is the area of the fiscal control, tax reform, customs reform. It's the area which have been standing and holding Ukraine from the further strong development. It's about showing and putting economy back into drive. And the forecast that we've heard from the Ministry of Economy recently, and it's all forecast for Ukraine. By the end of this year, Ukrainian GDP will grow between 1% to 2%. That's a general assumption across, if you look IMF, World Bank, Ministry of Economy, etc., National Bank. They will all give you a number within this range, which is a positive sign. But there are industries which are performing even better. High tech. Last year was amazing. We got, Luxury was acquired by Snapchat, $155 million. We got EBRD investing $5 million in the deposit photos. We got a series of venture investment from California, investing in several Ukrainian startups, at average $1 million. Oracle was acquiring Maximizer. George Soros made his first investments in Ukrainian company. He's been here supporting a lot of initiative and driving for democracy, but this is the first time he actually went in and made financial investment, and this is high-tech company. The average growth of the industry for Ukrainian high-tech, 25–30%. Profitability in the same range. This is a highly competitive market, and it's showing hockey stick performance. The R&Ds, okay. So Ericsson, open R&D. Boeing, move R&D from Moscow to Kiev. We're seeing more than 100 R&D centers today have taken place in Ukraine. For government of Ukraine, that's the priority because it's a new economy with more jobs, higher payroll, higher taxes, bigger contribution to the society, better development. But it's still the glass half full. There is still big half that needs to be filled. And this is a challenge that we understand we need to perform. At the same time, I think the optimism and the drive for this investment conference and for other investment conferences are very critical because that's what drives economy up. That drives the hope of Ukrainian society. It's a business that drives the development of the country. It's investment that drives the development. And the President, Prime Minister, and the Parliament are committed to the further development of the country. I haven't seen anybody saying, we're going to drain the bucket, so the quantity of water went down. The major seal that holds this glass half full and going up with the water in it is a civil society. The civil society and new Ukraine and the contemporary world development is what drives and secures the further development of Ukraine. And democracy is the key thing for Ukraine. Ukraine will stay on the path of being the democratic state, which is a key enabler for reforms and transformation in the country. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Shymkiv. I think next would be good to hear from Steve Fisher, who is going to speak representing American Chamber of Commerce in Ukraine as chairman, and he also happens to run the Citibank business here. Just a little thing.
Thank you. Thank you. Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Empire State Capitol, for organizing this conference. And it's good to see everyone here to come to a conference about investment in the new Ukraine, which is exactly what I think we need at this point in time. And what I'd like to do in the next few minutes is add upon what we've heard from Bohdan, Ambassador Pyatt, and Mr. Shymkiv about what's happening in the country and what we want to see next. And the first thought that comes to my mind is a famous quote, I believe, from an American sportsman, Yogi Berra, who once said that it ain't over until it's over. And that's where I think we are right now in New Ukraine, in that what we've seen is in 2014, we had a GDP decline of 7%, and last year we had a fairly horrific GDP decline of almost 10%. But for the last 3 quarters, we've had feeble but positive economic growth. So perhaps one can say that the worst is over, and we're now on a path to recovery. But clearly, that's not enough. Economic growth of 1 or 2% for a country like Ukraine with such great potential and a lot of catching up to do is clearly inadequate. And what we need to see is a transformation from this positive but weak economic growth phase of the economy into a sustainable recovery. And what I'd like to talk about now is what do we need to transform Ukraine into a sustainable economic recovery. Clearly there's work to be done. No one should be resting on their laurels, even though a lot has been achieved, and Mr. Shymkiv was very clear in specifying what has been achieved in many different sectors of the economy and policy-wise. But the truth of the matter is we still are in a country that's rated CCC, B-, and you really are not going to be able to do much in terms of attracting foreign investment and transforming the country with a economic rating like this. So what do we need to do to reach a sustainable economic recovery? Well, the Joint Chambers of Commerce for the foreign investment community, speaking at a meeting with President Poroshenko and the Prime Minister, Minister of Finance, Dmytro, the central bank governor, and many other leading government officials, as well as the G7 ambassadors and representatives of foreign and local industry just 2 weeks ago mentioned that there are 5 steps that we would like to see affected this year. Black and white steps. They're done or they're not done to help promote the transformation of where we are now into a sustainable economic recovery. And they're based on one key principle, which is that without the increase in foreign direct investment, which in turn helps a return of lending in the banking sector being the glue that puts the economy together, the catalyst that promotes and supports economic growth. Without these 2 factors occurring and accelerating, there is no way we're going to be able to move to a sustainable economic recovery. So we are focused on what do we need to bring foreign direct investment back to the level that you should see in this country. And for a country of this nature, with its economy and its state of economic development, one would argue that the level of foreign direct investment should be between at least 8 to 10% of the GDP per annum. And Ukraine right now is significantly below that. So we do have some work to do to get FDI up to that level, to kickstart the economy and for the economy to be growing faster in a more sustainable way. So what were these 5 steps that the foreign investment community proposed to the president 2 weeks ago? You've heard some of these steps mentioned already, but I'll repeat them because they come in sequence, and when you look at them in an integrated manner, you see that they will actually be addressing what the foreign investment community wants to see and what it needs to see right now. The first step, and we'll start with that, is indeed the resumption of the IMF program and the disbursement of the 3rd and future tranches. There are now 3 tranches, each about $1.6 billion, that have not been dispersed according to the original program guidelines. And these 3 tranches were from September last year, December last year, and March this year. So there is a lot of IMF funding that has not yet come into the country. And when the foreign exchange reserves of Ukraine are only about 13 billion, which is about 3.5 months of import, that's still not enough to propel Ukraine to the next step of economic development and give foreign investors and rating agencies and the international capital markets the comfort that Ukraine is economically and fiscally strong enough to attract the kind and support the kind of investment it needs. So the first step that the foreign investment community has asked for is indeed the resumption of the IMF program as quickly as possible. Once that is done, and we've asked to see that happen by the end of June because this is a very important and pressing matter. So June was the date, the end of June was the date that the foreign investment community asked the president to work with the IMF to achieve this goal. Following that, and only following that, because I think the second step will not be possible to implement without the first step being implemented, is we have asked the central bank to release the control on repatriation of dividends abroad, which has been in place for over a year and a half now. The central bank has estimated that over $700 million of declared dividends are currently frozen in the country from 2014, and a very likely similar amount from 2015. So that's about $1.4 billion of dividends that are not being repatriated by foreign investors back to their offices, their home offices. That represents about 12% of the current foreign exchange reserves of the country. That is not a small number, but that's the scope and the challenge that we have in front of us. But you can ask yourself that if dividends cannot be repatriated, dividends earned cannot be repatriated, well, what new foreign investor is going to consider to come to Ukraine and invest a large amount of new capital, despite all of the attractiveness that this country offers, if there is a freeze on repatriation of dividends? So we see that this is lock, stock, and barrel. It has to happen together. But this control must be lifted in order to get foreign direct investment coming back in the country. And what we have also asked for, again, at the same time after the next IMF disbursement, is a significant relaxation in foreign exchange controls. That is another impediment to foreign investment when frankly, no one can even hedge their investments in hryvnia versus the exchange rate right now. This is also not possible in the country. So this is the second request that comes immediately after the first request of the IMF disbursement that foreign investment needs to see in order to help us move to a sustainable recovery from where we are now. Now, what is the third step? Again, this is a very important message. This is a successful and transparent conclusion to the first privatization in this country of the Odessa portside fertilizer project. This is delayed. It's very important both for the government in terms of raising needed funds and in terms of sending a very concrete and very positive message to the foreign investment community that Ukraine is open for business, that privatization will be done according to international standards, transparent standards, and it is an opportunity for foreign investment to participate in the country. This is the third critical step, and the foreign investment community has asked the president to see this implemented before the end of August this year. Again, very black and white, deliverable or not delivered, but very important to getting us moving to a sustainable economic recovery. The fourth point the foreign investment community asked for was revision and passing of new legislation to simplify and make more easy to work with the tax ministry. This is one of the considerable complaints that you're hearing from the foreign investment community, that it's very difficult, it's uncertain of how to work with the tax ministry. So this has been an issue for foreign investors. We would like to see simplification of the rules and the methodology of working with the tax ministry, because this is part of every foreign investor's life, and it hasn't been exactly the most smooth process so far. And the fifth step that the foreign investment community has asked for to be implemented by year end is passage of legislation that will punish and make very punitive illegal smuggling, the counterfeit activity that you're seeing in many industries as well. This must be crushed. This must be focused on by the government. This must be prohibited in a very strenuous way, because this also hurts foreign direct investment, and not only capital investment, but technology investment as well. This is the fifth step that the foreign investment community has asked for the President and the Prime Minister to implement before the end of this year. And if these 5 steps are done holistically, we believe that we will see an increase in foreign investment. Now, obviously, I didn't mention some of the things that other speakers have mentioned about the anti-corruption efforts and reform efforts. These are critical. This is work started, but work certainly not yet completed. So I'm not de-emphasizing this, but this is a very large topic in and of itself. This has to be done concurrent with the 5 steps that I've just described in order to get this country moving in a more concrete, a more confident, a more transparent path from where we are now into a sustainable economic recovery in the future. So I'll end my comments based on what I've just said in terms of actions that we've recommended and turn it back to our moderator. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. I'd like to actually even highlight one of the 5 steps you mentioned that's been something we've been kicking and screaming about in our business as investment bankers and on behalf of our clients, which are international investors. I think that for foreign direct investment, the point about the deregulation of foreign exchange and the ability to take money back out of the country is probably the simplest, fastest way to get investors in. The other points obviously are needed, but those are all risk points that people are willing to take. The investors that we speak with, they want to at least know, if I send money in, can I get it out? It's a two-way fence, and this is just something I would like to add from our clients that is something that they're waiting for, and it's good that you brought this point up. I'd like to now ask Tatiana Korotka, Deputy Business Ombudswoman, to speak.
Dear ladies and gentlemen, it's a great honor to be here today for me. I'm a representative of the Business Ombudsman Council. It's a new institution that was established a year ago within the international anti-corruption framework. The Memorandum of Understanding was signed between among the government of Ukraine, European Bank of Reconstruction and Development, OECD, and the 5 biggest business associations. And Stephen Fisher is the chairman of one of these associations. The last year was pretty challenging for our institution, both organizing and lodging business to seek our support and to establish productive cooperation with public authorities. And today I could state that the first year was quite successful for both sides. The direct financial impact of our work is more than 3.5 billion hryvnias of Ukraine. And we received more than 800 applications to our office, and around half of them were successfully finalized, and cases were successfully closed for business. We established professional communications with many public bodies, such as State Fiscal Service, despite of the old problems around this area, with the National Anti-Corruption Bureau, with the Ministry of Justice, and we're going to sign these memorandums of understanding with the General Prosecutor Office. We hope we could do it, having a new prosecutor. This year, we could state that some positive changes in Ukrainian business environment were achieved, such as better registration system, less problem in fiscal areas, and there were many things done in the regulatory sphere. Unfortunately, our Ukrainian problems is quite big. That's why we couldn't state that, yes, it's an absolutely positive environment. But I believe that step by step, together with you, having anti-corruption institutions, we could overcome all difficulties and attract to Ukraine more investments and establish friendly environment for all businesses here. Thank you very much, and I'm looking forward for your additional questions.
Thank you, Tatiana. I'd like to give the last but not least word to Michael Dozenko of US UBC.
Thank you. First, I'd like to bring greetings from our president, Mr. Morgan Williams, who is now in Washington after having spent about 2 months here in Ukraine. Since 1995, the U.S.-Ukraine Business Council, or US-UBC as we're being abbreviated, has been uniting numerous American companies who invest in Ukraine, who create jobs in Ukraine, anywhere from Fortune 500 companies to small mom-and-pop operations. They all believe in Ukraine. They have been here, some longer, some shorter term, but they all do believe in Ukraine, and they continue doing business here. We, of course, were encouraged by the revolution of dignity, by the change in the government. We were all hoping that the new government will make one of our jobs, which is to help Ukraine become an easier and better place to do business, kind of easier. Well, Ukraine continues to fail to produce as much as it could. There are, of course, very, very good people in the government, in the parliament now. We were very happy to know that some of the representatives of business community actually went into the government, into Verkhovna Rada, into presidential administration. In fact, 2 are here on this panel. We've known them for some time, and there are a lot of other people with whom it's real pleasure to work. Why is there underperformance? Why is the old guard pushing out the new people? Is somebody draining this glass or not? I think I'm going to use an experiment here. We can argue whether it's 30% full or 40 or 50 or 60. If I do something like this, it's even harder to tell. And it's a matter of perception, basically, for people. People need to understand better, and this is what the leaders in both business and in the government and in the parliament in Ukraine should do. They need to explain to people why is there pain during the reform. I'm going to quote the band which almost went to Eurovision instead of Jamala, the Hard Kiss. They have this line, "'Cause rebirth always hurts." And that's what Ukraine is going through right now. It's rebirth. Reform is, it's maybe not enough to describe what's really going on. This is probably the way the business sees it in Washington, in New York, in San Francisco, in Seattle. It's probably the final chance for Ukraine to reform itself, to rebirth itself. There is positive trend. We're certainly encouraged by it. To the new government, to the parliament, we just say, keep pouring into that glass. Please do. We want more and more. As you know, business likes things done in the most efficient way. We always demand more. We want Ukraine to be an easier and better place to invest. We, U.S.-Ukraine Business Council, want to be able to American investors who are not that familiar with Ukraine, the glass is really more than half full, but the perception is not there. One of the things that we do is we communicate that there is not war all over Ukraine, that the corruption is there, but then corruption is there in any country. Even in the United States, people get arrested on corruption charges, including at the level of mayors of large cities, governors, and so on and so forth. So what does Ukraine need to do to utilize this last chance? One thing that we think is probably important, we all know about fighting with against corruption, about deregulation. As Mr. Fisher mentioned, the business doesn't like the idea that somebody decides what the business can and can't do with its money, that it earned honestly, we hope honestly. One of the things we communicate to the Ukrainian government, to the National Bank, is that yes, $1.4 billion may leave the country, but if the money doesn't leave the country, the check mark will not be checked by boards of directors, and $3, $5, $10 billion will not come in. Part of the problem is perhaps the kind of Soviet legacy of attitude toward property. During the Holodomor, during the dekulakization, the collective farm formation process, a lot of people who were very effective managers of their own private property, of their own assets, were either shot to death or sent to Siberia, and in general, population was discouraged from doing anything with the property. And then property became kind of everybody's and at the same time nobody's. The best example right now is the reform that's happening in the construction, the building and construction sector, the so-called OSBB reform. A lot of people don't care about their own buildings because they care about their own apartments, but they don't care about everything else that's around them because they don't feel it's theirs. And this is what's needed. Business leaders in Ukraine and political leaders need to, instead of thinking about just their own property, think about their property as part of the overall puzzle of economy of the country, and realize that there are some, using the multi-unit building analogy, common areas of which somebody needs to take care. And so what Ukraine needs, again, is the leaders who understand this concept of private property, who don't want other people's property unless it's in a normal hand-to-hand exchange. There should be also support for entrepreneurship from the government's offices, from the parliament offices, because entrepreneurship was punishable during the Soviet times. We need to change the paradigm on this. And people need to understand that if they fail in business because something didn't work right, the tax administration is not going to kill them for that. They should be able to go bankrupt and then start their own business. Again, it's not a crime to fail in business. Third, the West should continue to support Ukraine, both politically and economically. When business trusts certain people with whom they already, the Western business, when they trust people with whom they already do business, it's good. That needs to be expanded. The business votes with its money, as you know, and there is a lot of money sitting, waiting for the box to be checked off. If the government and the parliament allow this box to be checked, maybe Ukrainians will start thinking about starting their own businesses because they'd see, if the foreigners can do it in this country, why can't we in our own country? So, when it comes to this cooperation between business leaders and political leaders, that's what we would like to have. And then when it comes to other countries, other than the United States, we've been promoting this idea of having councils like us in the capitals of, let's say, 15 or 20 most important trade and investment partners. Let these councils become the leaders for Ukraine outside of Ukraine. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Okay, we have time for a few questions. I think that there.
Can I do a comment?
Yes, of course.
Thank you. Just on the currency liberalization, and this is important because it's a myth. One of the myths that's circulated and happily believe. A lot of you are investors, right? So you have companies where you invest, where you sit in the boards. How would you be looking at the management of the companies if they will start doing what they want with money, buying things or doing things that are not in line with the policy and the strategy that you put as an investor? The currency regulation have been imposed by IMF. There was a clear agreement that there is a very clear roadmap in terms of things and transformation with the currency regulation. It's been an agreement with the creditor to the state. If the plan would be executed according to the plan, according to roadmap that was signed, in April 2016, the currency regulation will be removed. In April, if 2016, hold on, we received the last tranche from IMF in August 2015. During the last period of time, we haven't received a single penny from the creditors. Okay? We are 5 billion behind the threshold which is required to remove it, which is set by creditors in an agreement. The governor of the National Bank and the president at the meeting with the business, and the prime minister was there, and the head of fiscal service and minister of finance made a very clear statement. The moment we hit the target, the currency regulation will be removed the second day. It's very, very clear. It's a connected thing. So please, let's not speculate on this. There is a very clear things which the country has to do according to the current agreement with the creditors or with the investor, as in your case. So that's why, at the same time, National Bank of Ukraine currently receiving the requests and building a pipeline of dividends payment to see how we can go further with negotiating. So those companies who want to get their dividends paid, they're all in discussion with National Bank of Ukraine how this can be structured. There is a very clear base. I'm not here to build the rosy pictures, but I would like, if we talk in business, with a former business, I want to have a very clear discussion and clear understanding how it evolves. Currently, National Bank is working to develop, and there is already half-year work done, by creating absolutely new regulation of the currency control, which is based on Euro Directive 88/361, which is European Union standards on currency regulation. It's an absolutely new approach. This is a kind of roadmap for the midterm, long-term strategy. Current strategy, we need to hit the reserves of the National Bank. Boom. We hit it, there will be currency regulation lifted. It's very clear dependency. It's not been created by somebody mythical in the government, and there is no mythical person who can lift it. Because the position of the creditors are very clear. You don't do it, if you start doing things, as in business, if you're an investor and the CEO start doing what they want, you will probably replace CEO, right? Or you pull out your funds. That's the same thing with the creditors. And the current situation of the state, the primary creditor of the state, the primary supporter of the state is IMF. Thank you.
Thank you very much for laying that out. I think that that just means we need to get the money from our creditors right away.
Exactly. And I said that's the priority number one.
Now we know what we're waiting for. Okay, thank you. Any questions from the audience?
I would like to ask a question about the currency. How can we talk about an investment conference without mentioning the fact that a stable currency for investment for FDI is key? And I know that in the National Bank would probably answer this question, but any thoughts about the need of having a stable currency?
Well, I think that probably, Steve, you can follow this, but if you look at the February last year, 40, almost 40 to exchange rate, 40. We almost were there. And now we went to currency which is more stable for the whole year.
Well, I wouldn't say that, Dmytro. That's, giving probably not a fully correct picture. Okay, this is very important, but it goes back to what we just said. Indeed, the 5 steps. If you want a stable currency, you have to have a central bank that has more reserves, and you have to have a very clear, well-communicated, and consistent policy. Now, Dmytro talked about that consistent policy. That's very correct. And I know the government understands that it has to be done. But the currency has been more stable. The central bank is focused on stability. Of course, it's very, very important. But the central bank needs more reserves and more tools to make sure that this stability is supported over a longer period of time, not just the last few months where we've seen the currency go from 27 sort of back to 25.2. Yes, it was at 30 or 35 for a week or so, but that was a very short bout of instability. But regardless, it's very important for everyone to know where this currency should be, and also to have hedging instruments to protect themselves, because in any country you're hedging against foreign exchange risk. People hedge against euro-dollar risk, so it's not just hryvnia versus dollars.
Thank you. Any other questions? Last call? No? Okay.
We've got just a last comment?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah,
of course.
Let me just to build on this conversation about dividends and repatriation and currency stability. I think especially for those of you who are not based in Ukraine, I think it's important to recognize how different the stage we are at today compared to where things were 2 years ago. In the spring of 2014, the continued existence of a unified Ukrainian state was at risk. There were tens of thousands of Russian troops on the Ukrainian border with deep concern, certainly in the part of the government of the United States, about how far President Putin was willing to go in terms of grabbing additional chunks of Ukrainian territory. As Dmytro alluded to, by February, there were wide swings in the exchange rate. Prime Minister Yatsenyuk, former Prime Minister Yatsenyuk, likes to tell the story about how when he came into office in the spring of 2014, he discovered that the government's reserves were essentially zero. That Yanukovych had robbed the country and had left a completely empty national bank. That is not the case today. Today, first of all, there is zero risk that Ukraine is not going to continue to move forward as a unified democratic state. The currency situation has stabilized. The path of reform has now been set. And that's a critically important breakthrough for which I believe the previous government is not given sufficient public credit. That is, the willingness of Prime Minister Yatsenyuk, Minister Juresko, Central Bank Governor Huntereva, Minister Abramovicius, and the rest of the team, and I won't name them all because I'll leave somebody out, but the willingness of that team to set in place a path of reform which Ukraine had never previously done. Ukraine had made lots of verbal commitments in the past, but this is the first time that Ukraine over 2 years has stuck to its IMF program, has stuck to the path of reform. These are difficult transitions, and you don't have to look that far elsewhere in Europe to see how challenging these kinds of transformations can be. But I am convinced, the United States government is convinced, that this new government is on the right path. It has demonstrated great resolve with its initial decisions, including the unification of energy prices, a courageous step that tackled, and again I will say this, the single sector which has been most responsible for corruption and distortion of the Ukrainian economy over the previous 25 years. So this is a moment, as Bohdan said, it's a moment, it should be a moment of optimism. It's certainly a moment of great possibility, and it's a moment where my government is committed to standing by Ukraine and standing by the Ukrainian people, as long as the President, the Prime Minister, the other political forces, the members of the Rada, stay united and stay resolved in their commitment to continue to build on the progress that's been achieved over the past 2 years.
Bogdan, you wanted the word?
It was on.
Ukraine is a multi-ethnic country. There are 102 ethnies that are organized. They have their own associations. But this is not a source of conflicts. It is actually, this is the kind of diversity that is in a harmony. It creates sort of a symphony rather than dissonance. I think this is an important thing to consider because there's this kind of basic stability despite the fact of this multi-ethnic nature of the country, of the population, of the people. And I think this is also a certain guarantee of a basic stability of the country. And I think it's important. You know, you can be Jewish, you could be Muslim, you can be of any ethnic, and you can be, and most of the people are Ukrainian patriots. It's their country. They care about it. They're committed to it. They're loyal to it. So I just wanted to put this point in because we have and we see so many countries which are multi-ethnic and where terrible wars going on between the different ethnies. This is certainly not the case in Ukraine, and I think we should keep it in mind, even not just making, say, financial analysis, economic analysis, but we should keep this in mind. This is one of the basic, of the fundamentals of the strength, and therefore likely stability of the country. Thank you.
Thank you, Bogdan. You actually touched upon something very interesting that I would like to comment on. I recently found out that my grandmother was from Berdichev. Being Jewish, that's very interesting. Apparently there was a large Jewish population there. And notwithstanding a lot of what is being said in propaganda by Moscow, myself being here since 2009, I feel that this is one of the most tolerant countries, one of the best melting pots, and the reality just in terms of what the glass looks like, perception versus reality, we need to work on perception against the, some of the propaganda machines working against this great nation of many different and vibrant cultures and ethnicities, which will make a great melting pot going forward. Last questions, comments from the moderator?
I did not add the obvious, Jamala, to have the Crimean Tatar represent Ukraine with such a, in a great fashion, feeling so patriotic. Yes, she's a Tatar. Yes, she's Ukrainian. And this is possible in Ukraine. And that's also a very, very important asset. So, vive Jamala.